Coming up in this week's Torah Pearls.
According to the documentary hypothesis, Deuteronomy has DTR, DTR1, and DTR2 as the sources accepted by most scholars. What is it that places a text in one category or one source over another?
This Torah portion is from a single source for the most part, so why does it repeat sections?
Hornet or a plague? What is it that chased the inhabitants of the land?
Did Moses carry the 2 stone tablets in just one hand or 2? And how big were those tablets anyway?
How many times did Moses fast 40 days and 40 nights? And who else supposedly did the same?
Aaron is mentioned twice in this Torah portion and nowhere else in Deuteronomy. But do these mentions align with the rest of the Torah?
All right, Jono, this is a big one. Let's jump in.
Better get cracking. G'day, dear viewers, and thank you for your company here once again on truth2u.org. That's truth number 2 letter u.org. I'm Jono Vandor, and joining me from the Horeb Institute in Louisiana is the author of the Moses Scroll, Ross K. Nichols. G'day, mate.
Hello, Jono. How are you, my friend?
Doing well, thank you, my friend. We are in Ekev.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. These are now airing on Shabbat. That's right. And just let me add one more thing, because this is new. This is the second episode that we played on Shabbat. I'm here in the Athenaeum in Jackson. If you're watching this Saturday morning live, then you need to stick around after and join us in the Zoom call. So that's where we'll have questions. We'll have some responses, some comments. You get to tell us what you think. And if you're not watching it live, put your comments in the below the description in this video.
Leave us some comments. We do.
That's
like
right.
those.
We like them.
Season 3 of Torah Pearls. And
that's right.
Ekev. And we are in Deuteronomy, our favorite book of the Pentateuch, our favorite book of the Torah. So Ekev begins from 7, chapter 12, extends all the way into chapter 11. We do have, of course, our AI critical scholar, Ezra. And Ezra, maybe you can kick us off with an academic overview of our Torah portion.
Here we go. Torah portion Ekev. In this section of Deuteronomy, Moses is still in full sermonic mode, but he pivots into one of the Torah's most sustained reflections on memory, obedience, and the subtle dangers of prosperity. He reminds Israel that their survival in the wilderness wasn't self-made. It was sustained by manna, discipline, and divine provision. He warns that once they enter the land, abundant harvests and strong cities could seduce them into thinking, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. That's ancient Near Eastern covenant theology in action. Obedience brings blessing. Forgetting leads to disaster. From a text-critical standpoint, Ekev reads like a later Deuteronomistic composition, knitting together older covenantal motifs with the centralizing theology we've been tracking since the start of the book. The repeated remember and do not forget refrains suggest a liturgical or didactic purpose, possibly shaped for recitation in a post-monarchic community still wrestling with exile and identity. And tucked into all this is a rather raw historical retelling. Moses recounts the golden calf incident with an edge that feels less like nostalgia and more like a prosecuting attorney's closing statement. In short, Ekev is less about new laws and more about shaping a national mindset, humility before God, gratitude for the land, and vigilance against the slow creep of idolatry that comes not from fear, but from comfort.
Sermonic mode. I haven't heard that phrase before, but he is, I suppose, Moses is in sermonic mode. And he does kick off, as Ezra points out, with the obedience and the blessings that come from obedience. And the thing that's interesting straight off the bat, Ross, for me, is that we have a repetition. I'm going to say it's a repetition, but we actually haven't addressed this passage yet. It's a preview. Can I say it like that? It's a preview of what you and I often refer to as the consequences of the blessings. That is to say that it is the consequences of the corresponding blessings to the Decalogue of the Moses Scroll. Now, those corresponding blessings, the blessed be the man phrases, we do have a version of that in the curses of Deuteronomy all the way. We've got to go to chapter 28 of Deuteronomy, 27, 28. It's going to be a while before we get there. But we don't have the blessings, of course. We've touched on that many, many times, and we will go into detail when we finally get there. But we do have the consequences of the blessings. So, blessed be the man who does X, blessed be the man who does Y. And we have 10 of those. And then at the end, the Levites call out, right, so now if you do all of these things that you've just agreed to, here are the consequences of that. Well, that happens at the Abal Gerizim ceremony, but we have it here. There's a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
There's a lot of overlap. So let me read the way it starts. And if you do obey these rules and observe, now you can imagine, Ross, the Levites saying, where it says, and now the Levites shall continue, and they shall say, and if you do obey these rules and observe them carefully, the Lord your God will maintain faithfully for you the covenant that he has made on oath with your fathers. He will favor you and bless you and multiply you. He will bless the issue of your womb and the product or the produce of your soil, your new grain and wine and oil, the calving of your herd and the lambing of your flock. In the land that he swore to your fathers to assign to you, you shall be blessed above all the peoples, and shall be no sterile male or female among you or among your livestock. The Lord will ward off all sickness from you. You will not bring any of the dreadful diseases, so on and so forth. And we'll get to that. But certainly 12 to 14 reads as a very close paraphrase and a preview to the blessings that the Levites do read out at the Abal Gerizim ceremony. What are your thoughts on that, Ross?
Well, I saw the same thing when I was working through, and so obviously what we see here, it is building up. I don't remember how you worded it, but it almost anticipates what is to come, because by the time we get to 11, at the end of this Torah portion and going into next Torah portion, you begin to see that there's discussion of this blessing and curse ritual that's going to take place on the two mountains. So it could be this sermonic portion leads from one to the next. But clearly, this does sound a lot like what we see in the Moses scroll in G, D, roughly from 10 on chapter or 10, 11, 12, and so forth. I mean, it reads almost exact. There is some slight wording difference, but if you look at it, I don't know if you have this in your notes, but the Levites will continue, and they will respond, and they will say in an exalted voice, see, if you will diligently listen to Elohim's voice, to guard and to do all his commandments, all these blessings will come upon you. You'll be blessed in the city, blessed in the field. Your basket, your kneading trough will be blessed. Fruit of your womb, fruit of the ground, the offspring of your herds, and the young of your flock will be blessed. It goes on. So it feels the same to me. It feels the same.
It's almost identical. It seems like an almost identical paraphrase, clearly drawing from what the Levites do pronounce at the blessing curse ritual. But what we know about that, and particularly as it reads in the Moses scroll, is that it belongs to a greater formula, which screams of authenticity. Having it removed from its context and placed here suggests something else. And what it seems to be saying to me, and I wonder about this, is the, I'm going to say collator, let's say the source, but the source who is collating information here, it seems like he is drawing from various traditions of the same text. So let's say that same text is the Moses scroll, or that the Moses scroll is a closer representation of that original Mosaic scroll. Maybe there were various traditions of this, various versions, various copies that were, some of them were sort of loosely departed from the original, and some of them were closer than the original. It seems like the Deuteronomist here is perhaps drawing from a number of those and trying to make everybody happy and bring them into the fold. Otherwise, it's repetition.
It is repetitious.
Out of place.
I was going to say that. Yeah,
but it's out of place repetition. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, not only is it repetition here, but we see it in multiple places. Like we brought up last week, we have Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2 says, don't add to, don't take away. And then we see that again in chapter 13, verse 1, or chapter 12, verse 32. It's the same. Now, you might say, well, no, it's just, there's no problem with seeing it twice. It just feels like at times that some of this material is cobbled together or placed together. Yeah, that may be a little bit harsh for some, but it's what it feels like, honestly.
Now, we've seen this happen a number of times throughout our Torah portions, throughout the entire Torah. But the thing that's interesting about this particular part is that both Richard Elliott Freeman and Baden say, oh, this is the Deuteronomist. This is the Deuteronomist pretty much all the way through. There's a few exceptions where these two gentlemen might disagree just with a few verses here and there, and we'll highlight those as we go through. But generally, this is what Richard Elliott Freeman is referring to as DTR1.
Mm-hmm.
But if that is the case, it seems like DTR1 is borrowing from multiple traditions and trying to cobble them together and keep everybody happy. That's because we're going to see this happen a number of times where things that are either previews of what we're about to read in chapters in the future, or things that we've already just recently read in Deuteronomy make guest appearances again. And you think, well, why? Why do we need that? Deja vu. So we'll see some of that.
Let me bring another point into this, Jono, that I think is, when we talk about structure, because I think it's only fair that if I say it feels at times like this final redactor or this final editor is cobbling things together, there could be a very positive reason for that, and the positive reason would be that the person doing this or the school of scribes who are doing this don't want to discard any of their sources. So they're trying to weave it together, and so you're going to get some repetition. Now, one other thing that I think, did you want to comment on that? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, hold that thought, because then people might be saying, well, what's the difference between the Deuteronomist and the redactor? And the answer would be that the Deuteronomist is one source or maybe a team that is working together for a final product, whereas the redactor is someone at a later time coming and saying, I think I could add a little bit of putty here and there and just sort of make this all work better. It's a redactor is much later. But go ahead.
Yeah, I just didn't want to skip the point that I wanted to get to was that in chapter 7, verse 12, where the Torah portion picks up, we see something that I wanted to highlight. I've brought it up over the past several years. I first noticed this, I don't know how many years ago. I would notice a repetition of 4 Hebrew verbs that would occur over and over, not only over and over, but in the same order. So here are the verbs. This is the English translation. Listen, which is generally the root shema. Learn or teach is often used in this 4-verb list. And that's lamad, which means to learn or teach. And then the next one is shamar, which is to guard, sometimes translated keep. And then asa, which means to do. So listen, learn, guard, and do. Well, here's the thing that I noticed. At times, you see all 4, such as in chapter 5, verse 1 of Deuteronomy. Can we let's look at a couple of these just to lay this out. Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 1. I just want to show how this comes across in these translations. 5 verse 1. This is the NRSV. Moses convened all Israel and said to them, "Hear, O Israel, the statutes and ordinances that I'm addressing to you today. You shall learn them and observe them diligently." So if you notice, it's here is listen, learn is you shall learn them, obviously, guard, observe them diligently, and the Hebrew is guard to do. Now, so we see all 4 there. We see all 4 in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 12. But just to make the point, in chapter 7, verse 12, we see Shema, we see Shamar, and we see Asa. So you see 3 of the 4. So again, it's just quite interesting to me. We'll point these out as we go through. Sometimes we see all 4. Sometimes we see 3. Sometimes we see 2. In other words, if it's only guard and do, it's never do and guard.
Right, so it's always in the same order is what you're saying.
That's right. Now, the reason I bring that up is because in Exodus, it's a different author. So in Exodus, and rabbinic literature makes a big deal about this. Remember the story where in Exodus it says, whatever he, how is it worded? Whenever the rabbinic saying is, whatever he says, we will do it and then we'll listen. The rabbinic saying is that they're so obedient that they're going to do it before they even hear the story. But notice that swaps the order that we see here. In Deuteronomy, you never hear do it before you listen. It's always listen and do. So this is just something to watch for. And the other reason I bring it up is because we see this same order reflected in the Moses scroll, which to me says that it is an authentic document. It's one of the proofs, at least in my mind.
Right. Yeah, no, I'll run with that. Listen, let me take you to verse 15. So the Lord will ward off from you all sickness. He will not bring upon you any dreadful diseases of Egypt, about which you know, but will afflict them upon your enemies. Now, I don't believe we have that in the Moses scroll. This is an addition. The previous verses, as we just mentioned, reflects the blessings. That's fine. But then in verse 15, it adds this. And the reason why I find this verse interesting, Ross, is because it's talking about sicknesses, disease, perhaps a plague. And the reason why I use that word is because it continues on. You shall destroy all the peoples that the Lord your God delivers unto you, showing them no pity, and you shall not worship their gods. That would be a snare to you. Should you say to yourselves, these nations are more numerous. Now, we do return to the Moses scroll here. If you say to yourselves, these nations are more numerous than we, how can we possibly dispossess them, Ross? You need not have fear. You have but to bear in mind that the Lord your God, what he did to Pharaoh and to all of Egypt, the wondrous acts that you saw with your own eyes, the signs and the portents, the mighty hand and the outstretched arm, by which the Lord your God liberated you. Thus will the Lord your God do to all the peoples that you now fear. And then in verse 20, the Lord your God will also send now I have in the Jewish study version, I have plague. What do you have in verse 20?
Well, the ASV has hornet, and just to make the point, the Masoretic text clearly has hornet. So
that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
because
it is interesting.
And the reason why I highlight that is because verse 15 is saying, a sickness, disease of Egypt. So you'll avoid that. We're going to put it on the enemies, da-da-da-da-da. We get to verse 20, and here it's translated as plague, but it does say hornet is your point. What do we have in the Moses scroll?
Well, in the Moses scroll, first of all, there are enough letters connected that all of the readers in the 19th century had to come away with that this is the word sara'at, which is associated, most English readers read that in their Bible as leprosy, but it means a plague. It's some kind of skin disease, some ailment in that sense. So it's interesting that the JPS, the Jewish Study Bible of the JPS, and some modern translations make that association because it doesn't make sense, Jono, that the hornet is going to just chase all the bad guys away. But we see that in 3 texts. We see it not only here, but we see it in Exodus chapter 23, verse 28. We see it in Joshua chapter 24, verse 12. It says the hornet is going to chase out the 7 nations. But that doesn't seem to make sense. Well, it's interesting that the Moses scroll doesn't say hornet. It clearly, even though there's a missing letter, we see enough of the word that we know it's going to say hornet, and that the ailment, the plague, as opposed to the hornet.
Yeah. Another interesting thing, and I just read this, verse 18, you need not have fear of them. You have but to bear in mind that the Lord your God, what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all of Egypt. And again, as I mentioned, that is in the Moses Scroll. In fact, that's the only place, if I'm not mistaken, Ross, where Pharaoh is mentioned in the Moses Scroll. And but what is inserted then is verse 19, the wondrous acts that you saw with your own eyes, the signs and the portents, the mighty hand, the outstretched arm by which the Lord your God brought you out. As I've mentioned many times, mighty hand, outstretched arm, anthropomorphic language referring to God. Never, ever see that in the Moses Scroll. So we have a little verse from the Moses Scroll, and then we have this kind of insertion where we go, oh, look, there's an example of that. I bet that's not in the Moses Scroll. You go and look, and of course it's not there. Right.
Well, just the other thing that I would bring up, and you and I did we had a fun exercise. I think it was one of the years that you were here for the conference in Louisiana, and we did sort of a stream during Pesach. And one of the things that we did, if you remember, we pulled the passages or the wording, the phrases, the sections from the Moses Scroll that had to do with that theme of Exodus from Egypt, where you mentioned Pharaoh, you mentioned, anything that was associated with Egypt. And just so people have it in their notes, in the Moses Scroll, in EB2, GA4, and GC1, there are some of those themes. You get, obviously, those passages seem to hint at that theme, and it clearly says you were in Egypt and God brought you out. So that is in the Moses Scroll, if people are wondering.
Now, speaking of the great and amazing things that God will do to the enemies, the people as they move, to the enemies as the people move into the land, and the debate regarding of whether it is a hornet or whether it is a plague, and I think you're right, I think it's probably a plague, leprosy. It's interesting to me, Ross, verse 22, very curious verse. It says, the Lord your God...
Where are we at?
This is
7:22. Okay.
The Lord your God will dislodge those people from before you little by little. Good enough. You will not be able to put an end to them at once, not all at once, Ross, because otherwise the wild beasts would multiply to hunt you, which is bizarre to me. I mean, of course, this verse is not in the Moses Scroll, but what it is saying is, God's going to take care of all of these people, the enemies that are going to fight against you. Don't worry, he's going to take care of that. He can't do much about the wild animals.
They're going to be so numerous that they're going to take you over.
Yeah, you're going to have
get
to
rid of the seven nations, but those lions and tigers and bears are going to get you.
And the hornets. There's not much that can be done about those guys. We don't really have dominion over that. But I tell you what, if we do this slowly, you'll find a solution to that as we go. But can't do it too quick because wild animals are going to can't protect you from that. It's a strange verse to add.
That opens up, by the way. It opens up as we work our way through and as some of these discussions go further. Think about how long did it take for Israel to totally eradicate the land of those bad guys, right? I mean, how long did it take? Remember, all the way back in Genesis, it even tells us in chapter 12, verse 6, then the Canaanites were in the land. So this is written at a time when the Canaanites were not in the land. Genesis 12:6, right? It's an obvious giveaway. It's an anachronism. The question becomes, and this is just for people can put comments or maybe think about this, when were those seven nations taken out? Here it says it's going to take a while, because if we do it all at once, these wild animals would take over, and it did.
And
take
that is
a while.
interesting too. And we mentioned this at the end of at the last Torah portion, because this is the way that chapter 7 opens up with these seven nations that the Lord is going to drive out. In the Moses Scroll, once again, it's just the Amorite they are target number one, and that's the only land that they take. That's the only land that they occupy and defeat the occupants thereof. And so it would appear that after taking that stronghold, then over a great deal of time, other nations, other peoples were also taken out. But what is that period of time? That is the question. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 8, Ross. Is there anything else in chapter 7 that you want to highlight?
No, I just want to make a note, and it's something that we ought to be looking for as we work our way through, but we'll see it again in chapter 10 and 11 and further into Deuteronomy, is the idea that in Deuteronomy we meet with something that we don't see in Exodus, Leviticus, or Numbers, Genesis either, and that's this idea of a very, very strong and expressed love between Israel and God and Israel, Israel and God. We see it from the very beginning in chapter 7 of our Torah portion, but we'll see it again in chapters 10 and 11 in this Torah portion. But people ought to be looking for it because it just doesn't exist outside of the book of Deuteronomy. And I think it's telling, and it also gives us another clue about the origin in the Moses scroll and how both of these, Deuteronomy and the Moses scroll, both have this idea. So just keep your eyes peeled.
Chapter 8, Ross, appears to me to be the Deuteronomist saying, oh, look, don't forget about these guys. They've got this tradition with these stories. Maybe it's not in the scroll that we found in the temple, but we need to incorporate some of this. So it begins like this. And again, it begins with a little bit of repetition. You shall faithfully observe all the instruction that I enjoin upon you today, that you may thrive in and increase and be able to possess the land that the Lord has promised on oath to your fathers. And then begins with remember, verse 2, the long way that the Lord your God has made you travel in the wilderness these past 40 years. So here's a mention of the 40 years and the hardships and so on and so forth. Now, a couple of things about this, and you highlighted this to me just before. Verse 3 mentions the manna. I'll get you just to talk about that. But, of course, in verse, I think it's 15 and verse 16, again mentions the manna. It doesn't just mention the manna, but mentions the seraphs, the snakes within the wilderness. It sort of alludes to that narrative as well, by which we ended up with the serpent on the pole or whatever that was, the seraph on the pole, Nehushtan. And so it seems to me, once again, that the Deuteronomist is saying, don't think that I'm overlooking your text as well. I'm going to bring a little bit of that narrative in. We're going to put it in here because it's not mentioned in the Moses scroll that we found in the temple. Go ahead.
Yeah, we do get signs from time to time of a later hand, and this is one of them. In verse 3, and he humbled thee and suffered thee to hunger and fed thee with manna, which thou knewest not, neither did thy fathers know, that he might make thee know that man does not live by bread alone, but by everything that proceedeth out of the mouth of Jehovah doth man live. That's the ASV. The thing that stands out, both in the English as well as the Hebrew, is that this says that the feeding with manna is a done deal. It's describing that he fed them, past tense, with manna.
Something that happened in the past tense, yeah.
But we know, according to Joshua chapter 5, that they continued to eat manna the full time until they crossed into the land. And let me give you one more. Exodus chapter 16, at the end of chapter 16, clearly the same later hand is writing there, because in Exodus 16 it says, and God caused you to eat the manna for 40 years while you were in the wilderness until you crossed into the new land. So whoever wrote this part particularly is from a time after they're already in the land, settled, and no longer eating manna. It's a giveaway. It's an anachronism.
It's a bit of a giveaway. It goes on to talk about the features of the land, like detailed features of the land. This is a place with springs and fountains and streams and plains and hills, and it has wheat and barley and vines and figs and pomegranates, olive trees and honey, a land where you can eat, it's abundant. And by the way, there's copper in them hills, Ross. Don't forget about that. There's copper in them hills. And we made, by the way, a snake on a pole with some of that copper. And have eaten your
We've
fill.
We've actually seen some of that copper. We've been to the place and picked it up off the ground. That's right.
Yeah, there you go. The good land which he has given you. So take care lest you forget the Lord your God, and make sure you don't you don't fail and to keep his commandments, the rules, his laws, which I enjoin upon you today. But it goes on, and then it mentions, as I said, 15 and 16, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its seraphs serpents, Ross, seraph serpents, and scorpions, a parched land with no water in it, brought you forth water from the flinty rock. There's another reference to another narrative there. Who fed you in the wilderness with the manna. There's another narrative, which your fathers had never known, in order to test you by hardships and to benefit you in the end. So, it just seems like it wants to make mention of those narratives that aren't part of the original Moses scroll.
Yeah, there's one thing, and I don't know if you're ready to get into this, but we're going to cross a point if people are following along in the Deuteronomy Torah tablet. They're going to see here pretty soon in verse 19 of chapter 8. Did you have something before that? Because I just want to...
No, let's get into 19. I'll just mention that verse 18 is part of that is from the Moses scroll. Remember that the Lord your God who gives you power to get wealth. This idea of getting power, that it is God, the one who gives you the power to do well. You find that in the Moses scroll. But verse 19, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you're going to see when we get to verse 19 that in the Torah tablet, it's indicating that this is DTR2. Now, lest people get confused, because it can be confusing. Again, this is part of the documentary hypothesis, and Jono has brought up on the last several episodes where some scholars disagree on even where the line is, where one might call it J, another might call it E. This is a working hypothesis. But here's what I'd like to do. I want to ask Ezra something about this and see if he can help explain this. Ezra, help us understand, at least from a documentary hypothesis, particularly some of the things that we read in, say, Frank Moore Cross. By the way, this is a great book, Canaanite Myth and Hebrew Epic. There is a part of this that gets into this, the themes of the Book of Kings and the structure of the Deuteronomistic history by Frank Moore Cross. And he discusses, how do you know what's DTR? In other words, what was the first layer of Deuteronomy, according to the scholars? What was the next layer, Deuteronomy 1, and what is Deuteronomy 2? So, Ezra, maybe you can help make some sense out of that, and then we'll talk about it if we need to.
So in Deuteronomy, we're mostly swimming in what Friedman and Cross would call the Deuteronomistic material. The shorthand for that is DTR, which is the editorial school behind both the book of Deuteronomy and the historical narrative running from Joshua through Kings. It's not one author in the singular sense, but rather a theological program. Centralization of worship in Jerusalem, covenant loyalty as the lens for all history, and an intense concern with obedience to Yahweh's commandments as the sole basis for national survival. Now, Frank Moore Cross famously proposed a double redaction theory. DTR1 is the earlier edition, composed in the late 7th century BCE, probably during the reign of Josiah. Its goal? To frame history as moving toward Josiah's reforms, celebrating centralization and cleansing the cult as the high point of Israel's covenant faithfulness. DTR2 comes after the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BCE, reworking that same history with the bitter hindsight of exile. Where DTR1 is optimistic, DTR2 is more explanatory and even mournful, showing that despite the reforms, the people's persistent disobedience sealed their fate. We identify these layers not because some ancient scribe signed his work Yours Truly DTR2, but through shifts in tone, vocabulary, and theological emphasis. Optimistic passages celebrating a righteous king often sit side by side with sober reflections on inevitable judgment, and the seams show. Repetition of key phrases like "with all your heart and all your soul," the exclusive focus on the place Yahweh will choose, and the formulaic evaluation of kings are all hallmarks that help us spot the Deuteronomistic hand.
One of the things, this is pretty interesting. It's a fascinating study. We're not going to dig too deeply into this right now, but just in short, by the way, great job, Ezra. One of the things that Frank Moore Cross's great article, when he brought forward this DTR2, this double redaction theory, as it's called, is this. The story was composed, DTR, Deuteronomy, as it was, and this is the theory, but it was framed up, so from Deuteronomy, we're looking forward, Jono, for a person who's coming, who loves the Lord his God with all his heart, with all his soul, with all his everything. And that person comes in the form of Josiah. What scholars believe is that this Deuteronomy, DTR, is written in the time of Josiah because it was expected that he was going to be the end of the story. They lived happily ever after. Culminate in him. But then, surprise, surprise, he takes an arrow to the heart. Even though Huldah said, you'll go to your grave in peace. He didn't go to his grave in peace. He dies on the battlefield. Either he dies on the battlefield, as Kings puts it, or as Chronicle puts it, they get him back and he dies in Jerusalem. Sources don't agree. Either way, arrow to the heart. So then you got to say, well, we have to continue the story. And notice after Josiah, for those who went through the 25-part series of Jeremiah with me, bad king, worst king, bad king. It just goes to hell in a handbasket. So, but the story had to continue. So then later, what Frank Moore-Cross and others noted is that there's certain language that comes across in Deuteronomy that seems tacked on, that says, and if you don't do these things, you'll be carried away into exile and so forth, because they knew that the story needed to be updated to reflect the later reality of exile. That's what Ezra's talking about there, and we're going to see some of that.
So that makes a lot of sense to me, I have to say. And what Ezra was referring to as a theological program, I like the way that Ezra put that, because again, it seems in my mind, and you tell me what you think of this, it seems to be reflective of a team effort commissioned by Josiah to say, okay, I want you to take this scroll that we found in the temple, and I want you to take also this body of law that I have, this reform that I want to impose upon the people. It's going to be for the betterment of Israel, and I also want you to take from some of the traditions that are not found in either of these documents, and I want you to weave this together in a way that culminates in me as the greatest king, and a Mosaic prophecy, if you like, and it seems like this theological program, as you said earlier on, was cobbling together all of these various aspects to try and make it work. But then, despite what Huldah said, to your point, Josiah dies, and everyone's like, this whole reform that we've got here, this whole theological program now, the climax is the balloon has been popped. What are we going to do about that? And so therefore, DTR 1, DTR 2, but these are still part of the theological program that was initially put into the wheels in motion by Josiah. Is that fair? And then much later you have some further redacting outside of that theological program. Your thoughts?
That could be. What we don't know, here's what we have. We've got pieces that people have to then interpret. So we know, according to our sources, 2 Kings 22:23, 2 Chronicles 34:35, it is the time of Josiah. It's not only the time, it's the 18th year of his reign, 622 BCE. A scroll is discovered. The scroll is called, in both sources, Kings and Chronicles, it is indicated that this is the scroll that Moses wrote. Well, that's a shocker, Jono. And here's the thing that I've been thinking and working, and you and I have worked on for 4 or 5 years now, is figuring out how these pieces go together. Here's what the scholars do when they read the story. They say, wait a minute, there's not a scroll that was found in the days of Josiah. It's called a pious fraud. They wrote a scroll to justify the reform of Josiah. So what the scholars would say I'm talking about from the 19th century forward, this has been their basic view of Deuteronomy, that one they know for a fact, almost without exception, they date it to, guess what, 7th century BCE, 622, roughly, if you want to give it a date. We don't know, though. Here's the question that I continue to wrestle with. Let's say, here's another option. Let's say that sort of what you just described, that Josiah is a king, he wants to bring about religious reform. Remember, if you read Kings and Chronicles, one says that he doesn't begin the reform until after the discovery of the scroll. That's Kings. He's just a good boy and living right, I guess, but he's not really, his first act is to, really get the temple restored. Chronicles, on the other hand, says that from the time the kid's 16 years old, he's on a roll. He's doing the reform, and then he finds the scroll. So, but one thing is certain. When we get to the days of Josiah, 7th century BCE, and Deuteronomy, we have something we've not seen before, centralization of worship. We're going to move the cult to Jerusalem. I actually believe that a lot of it is invented at that time. I think a lot of it doesn't even come into creation until this point. Here's one other point I'll make, though, and then we'll open it up. You and I can discuss. But here's the question: which comes first? And here's the other thing: we've got two prophets, Jeremiah and Zephaniah, who were alive at that time. Kings and Chronicles say things are going great in the kingdom. Everyone is repenting. We're all coming under a new covenant with Josiah. Everything's holy. Everything's great. The temple's back in motion. Behind the scenes, if you put a microphone to Jeremiah and Zephaniah and you go, "Hey, boys, you're a prophet? Yeah. What's going on? Is there a
How's
great
it going
revival?"
with this reform? Yeah.
And they would say, "There's no
Don't know anything of
revival.
it."
This, like Jeremiah says,
We're in
this
serious
house
trouble.
is going to be torn down. This place is off the chain." And he's constantly, and he says, the lying pen of the scribes made the Torah a lie. Bottom line, I think there may have been a collection of various legal matters that were already around that had evolved over time, and then, shocker of all shockers, the real deal is found. When the real deal is found, Josiah rips his garments. He doesn't know this material. And to your point, it's all cobbled together then. The original thing that was found with some of the earlier material, which explains some of the contradictions we see.
And the omissions, like the way that one is blessed. So a couple of things on that. As you and I speculated, speaking of this theological program, so Josiah, they find the scroll. They realize that this is the scroll. It's of major significance, but they also have this body of law that's part of this great revival that Josiah wants to bring about. So he says, "Look, oh my goodness, you guys, you're the scribes, and just bring it together and give it a kosher stamp. Can you just make this body of law sound like it also comes from Moses?" And so then we have the Mosaic authority. We can present it to the people and say, it's great stuff. And you and I speculated last week that perhaps Jeremiah and Baruch were part of this theological program, part of this commission. It's fairly safe to speculate on that because we know that there's an enormous amount of shared phrases and vocabulary between the book of Deuteronomy and Jeremiah. Not just the book of Deuteronomy and Jeremiah exclusively, but also phrases that are only used in the Moses scroll and vocabulary only used in the Moses scroll also shows up in Jeremiah that shows that he was familiar with this document as well. And it would appear to me, and I think you concurred last week, that somewhere along the line, Jeremiah became disgruntled with the way that it was being taken by the greater team of this theological program, and when he voiced his opposition to some of these aspects that were being introduced into the scroll, he was shot down. He was imprisoned. He was threatened. His life was threatened.
Well, they wanted to kill him. Yeah,
they wanted to kill him, and and he writes about this. He's like, that as to your point, lying pen of the scribe, so on and so forth. Now, so what I'm curious, having said all of that, does Frank Moore-Cross have a theory in regards to Jeremiah and his relation to Deuteronomy?
I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that, but I think most scholars would agree that when you're dealing with the 7th century, you've got to deal roughly with, you've got 3, maybe 4, I guess 4 pieces of real big evidence. That's the book of Jeremiah, the book of Zephaniah, Kings, Chronicles. You've got to look at all of those because you're dealing with a certain period of time. And what I'd really like to focus, what I've tended to focus on is a 40-year period. In that 40-year period of Jeremiah's prophetic role, Zephaniah is a part of that, but Jeremiah is there throughout the whole thing. He's there from the 13th year of Josiah's reign, right? And we know this from Jeremiah 1:1, and he sees, and even according to Jeremiah, he creates a dirge, if you will, when he sees the king killed. But what's odd is we don't see any interaction between Jeremiah and Josiah. You would think that the prophet of God would be with the young, and they're both young guys. People picture some Gandalf-looking king and prophet. No, they're both young. Remember, Jeremiah's just a boy when he's called. Long story short, I think it's interesting. You have to look at this 40-year period, and tragedy of tragedies is that Jeremiah, first of all, is not consulted when the scroll is found. He's not. They go to Huldah, whoever Huldah is, and she gives bad advice to the king, who's later dies. He was supposed to die in peace and gets killed with an arrow. It's the whole thing is just the craziest story. So most scholars believe that the answer to the questions that we're speculating on is to be found in this 40-year period. Was the scroll found and it was mixed with other scrolls, or let's say that there was a Josiah revised version in the works, and they said, "Hey, boss, we just found the real deal," and they're like, "Oh man, we got to somehow make all this fit together." It's a bizarre story.
Bizarre story. All of that to say that, again, chapter 8, verses 19 and 20, Richard Elliott Freeman does attribute to DTR2 as opposed to DTR1. And if I understand that, he does so because it's talking about Israel perish and being, it says, like the nations that the Lord will cause to perish before you, so you shall perish, and because you did not heed the Lord your God. So it's sort of retrospective. That's the reason why?
Yeah, it's like they're going in and they've got to give an answer to why the enterprise didn't work. It gives you a blessing and a curse, and then this is the theory. People don't have to accept it, but the theory is the working model, something went awry, and we have to explain how the king, who was unlike any before him, loved God with all his heart, soul, and mind. How did he end up dead on a battlefield? What happened?
So I'll just mention that Baden does not attribute this to DTR2. He continues this all the way along. But it is interesting. I can see where Richard Elliott Freeman is concluding.
And
Chapter
by the way,
9,
Friedman, one quick point. Friedman is getting, he's a student of Frank Moore-Cross. So a lot of times you find one, you find the other, and people may not agree with them, but they've got some pretty interesting theories.
Really do.
So I highly recommend it.
Hero Israel. So here we are with Shapira again, Ross. You're about to cross into the Jordan to go in and dispossess nations greater and more populous than you. Great cities with high walls, walls sky high. That's in the Moses Scroll. This is 9 verse 1. We find something similar there in the Moses Scroll. And then it departs. Where does it depart? Verse 2, a people great and tall, the Anakites, of whom you have knowledge, for you have heard it said, who can stand up to the children of Anak? Once again, no giants at all in the Moses Scroll. No reference to giants, nothing about it whatsoever. And so it's not a surprise that we don't find it there. But it returns in verse 3, and we do find this in the Moses Scroll. Know then this day that none other than the Lord your God is crossing at your head. He's a devouring fire. It is he who will wipe them out. He will subdue them before you. that you may quickly dispossess and destroy them as the Lord promised you. Now, that kind of goes against, was it 7:22, where it says, but not too quickly because of the wild animals.
Right.
But here, apparently, quickly. Yeah. Chapter 9, what would you like to highlight?
Just a couple of quick points. It leads us into, we've got 2 references in chapter 9 and 1 in 10 in Deuteronomy about fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. I would just highlight that. We see that also in the Moses scroll. But not only do we see Moses do it 3 times in the Pentateuch, all in Deuteronomy, but we see Elijah in 1 Kings 19:8. And then for our Christian friends, we see Jesus in Matthew 4:2 and Luke 4:2 doing the same. Yeah. So and by the way, it's all at the same, around the same place. So the stories are tied to the region of Horeb. So
that is exactly right. So I've got a note here: 40 days and 40 nights. Deuteronomy adds that Moses neither ate nor drank during this time. We don't have that in the Moses scroll, but Deuteronomy makes it a little bit more dramatic in that way, a little bit more miraculous, I suppose. Right. I have written here, it is worth noting that according to the Moses scroll, the people made a golden calf on the day that I went up. This is Moses speaking in the first person. On the day that
I went up. Long.
The day that I went up into the mountain to receive the 2 stone tablets. But Deuteronomy, on the other hand, has the people making a calf after waiting for Moses for 40 days and 40 nights. So here we are in Deuteronomy chapter 9, verses 11 and 12. Thus fasting, he fasts a total of 80 days and 80 nights, because we have that reference in Deuteronomy 9:18. It's crazy, the way that Deuteronomy makes this even more miraculous. But in the Moses scroll, it is just 40 days and 40 nights. It doesn't mention anything about. And then there is a question of, is this actually 40 days and 40 nights, or is this just a reference to, like we would say, dozens of times, such and such happened, or there were dozens of people, or whatever. It's just
and some scholars do put forward that idea. If 40 appears in some certain verses, and that's the way it comes across. But here's the other thing, to your point earlier, could it be that we have different sources that are put together, and this source told the story of a lengthy fast? Let's say it's 40 days and 40 nights. Let's say it's 40 days and 40 nights with no food and water. And we have another story that tells the same story, basically, a few other details, but it mentions that 40 days and 40 nights. As they come together, then you're saying, well, how many times did Moses fast for 40 days and 40 nights? The final resulting document seems to suggest that we have 3 mentions of a 40-day and 40-night fast. We have to figure out, are those all describing the same event, maybe from different sources? Those are the questions we have to answer.
Now, in amongst this narrative, this is a quirky little thing, but I'm going to mention it. My 2 hands, Ross. The tablets were in my 2 hands. So this is, Moses comes down from Horeb. He sees the golden calf incident, and he throws them down and shatters them. Okay, so in the Moses scroll, and I think also in Exodus, it is my hand, singular, which is interesting. Deuteronomy makes specific mention of 2 hands. In
this passage.
In this passage. And so it makes one wonder, it kind of makes you wonder, how big were these
tablets?
Were they very big? Like in the movie where the 10 Commandments, when he comes down with these big tombstones in his hands? Or were they actually something smaller that he actually could carry in his hand? Were they something akin to the Moabite stela, this big, massive piece of basalt?
Or these little Sumerian tablets that we find in history?
Are these like the Babylonian cuneiform type of clay tablets, that he could put in his hand? And also the fact that he has thrown them down and they shatter. What were they made of? Is it basalt? Or is it clay? What's going on here? Do you have an opinion on this?
Well, it's funny. I'll just say quickly, Seth made a really cool graphic the other day for our last episode. And, he worked it. And one of the things is that this one, when he generated it, had the big tablets.
I
and
saw that.
one of our friends, cool. Marianne, said, hey, I wish that it were the smaller ones. And, here's the thing. We just don't know. We don't know if they were big. We don't know if they were small. If we take into account the references in Exodus 31:18 and 32:15, we get some details about what these tablets were in the sense it says they were written on with the finger. You could read them the front and the back. I mean, I've jokingly said, because we tend to think these have to be caveman rocks.
Yes.
But what if it was some sort of, like, I've jokingly held up my cell phone. What if it's something like this from the God of creation, and it contains, and he sees God writing on it with his finger? You can imagine this would kind of blow you away. But what is it that we're talking about here? Could it be something so high tech? I mean, I'm not trying to get too crazy, but maybe. I mean, the God that created a hummingbird could create something better than Steve Jobs came up with.
Well, this is the thing, because it does make you. The more you think about this, the more interesting it becomes. Because does God have a problem writing in a font that is too small? Because, of course, the Moses Scroll, once again, doesn't mention a finger of God. There's no anthropomorphic language. Deuteronomy mentions that. Exodus mentions the finger of God. So it's like, do we limit God to being able to, sort of type, not type, but present a font that's small enough to be put on a clay tablet, perhaps that big, or a couple of those, And if it were a couple, has he given it to us in duplicate, or has he divided them into two parts strategically? Right. And we may have an answer to that later. That's this program.
I know you're working on something we can't talk about yet, but let me just say this, totally different than that. Different theories. One says that the 10 words are written on one tablet, both sides. 10 words. You have a tablet and it contains the whole covenant, both sides. You have the other tablet is a duplicate of the first one. And whereas some people say, no, the first 5 are on one tablet and the second 5 are on another. So there are all these things, but here's the reason there are all these different answers. We don't know. We just don't know, not based on the text.
Yeah.
But we do know that at times it says he had them in his 2 hands, and sometimes it says he had them in his hand. Now, depending on how big they are, how thick they are, how heavy they are, what kind of material is being used, you could carry 2 big tablets that aren't that heavy in one hand, like under your arm, and you walk down the mountain. Or you could carry 2 small tablets, one in each hand. We just don't get a clue.
Now, I think there must be a reason, and your Hebrew is better than mine. There must be a reason why, because you've translated it as hands in the Moses Scroll. What you've got here is, and the 2 tablets were in my hands, but it's biyadi, isn't it? Biyadi, in my hand. But
and it could be either, right? It just depends.
It could be either. Yeah. I think because of the surrounding words that it could be interpreted as either of those. And it says, Moses says in the Moses Scroll, and I saw your sin and I shattered the 2 tablets before your eyes. And what we have is, I saw your sin, I shattered the tablets in that order. And I interceded on your account at that time 40 days and 40 nights, as we were mentioned. So this is the way that it's presented. It seems like the shattering was a deliberate act of righteous indignation, if you like.
Sure.
As if to say, I can't believe it. But even that is quite bizarre, Ross, because here is Moses holding tablets of writing that is somehow inscribed or imprinted by Elohim.
Yeah.
And yet his response is to shatter that before them. Just incredible. And so he has to go through the whole thing again.
When we went on our trip, we've been a couple of times with the Tylers. We went, and others as well, Vanderham and Vicky and some of our other friends, Elon. And anyway, when we go to Khartoum, one of the things I'm looking for is if this is, because it's proposed as one of the sites. People have their favorite sites, whatever. But I'm looking for, what kind of rock do we have here? look around and what could have been used. Because some people might say, well, Ross, your idea of a glass-cased iPhone is out because it says stone tablets. Well, what kind of stone? Is it some kind of flinty rock? You know, the rabbinic literature is very interesting to read, too. It's all guesses, too. You know, was it made out of some sapphire-type stone, or what kind of stone was it? So we don't know, but it has to be, you know, Moses flings them down, he breaks them, and that sets up for a whole nother story that's coming. So
yeah, and what we do see, just further to that story, is that that visit to Har Karkum is an enormous amount of petroglyphs. That is pictures that are seemingly chiseled into these flinty type boulders, actually. Very, very different, and we see that in we were in the Wadi Rum. We saw identical petroglyphs as well, but it's very different to what we see in the Moabite stone.
Right.
So yeah, like you just don't know.
Yeah, I'm not super specially trained at this, but when I see some of those pictographs, and it always gets me that someone, an expert can look at that and say that is 3,800 years old, and you're like, really? Give or take, and they'll give you a date, and I'm like, I'm telling you, I just don't know that wasn't made in 1928. I just, some of it just, because I can take and make similar things on those rocks, scratching, and I'm just not a good artist, but some of those guys aren't either, or gals, whoever's drawing on them. Anyway, it's a fun study. It's a fun study. What were they? How big were they? Don't know.
Another piece of narrative that isn't in Deuteronomy, that is clearly sourced from other traditions and placed in here, Ross, appears in verse 20 of chapter 9. And this Baden does attribute to the redactor. Richard Elliott Friedman does not, but it says, moreover, the Lord was angry enough with Aaron to have destroyed him. And so I interceded for Aaron at that time also. So, and this is during the golden calf. But there is, how many mentions of Aaron in the book of Deuteronomy, Ross?
Just two, man. Two. This is one. And the other tells, we're going to get to that in a moment, tells where he died. And it doesn't agree, Jono, with where he dies as far as the book of Numbers goes. So which one is it?
So which one is it?
We're going to see that.
But it's rather telling, isn't it?
It is really rather telling.
All right, so now we got to move forward. Good heavens!
Man, we're going to have to keep going. Yeah.
No, we got to keep going. I think I'm going to jump into chapter 10 unless there's something else you would like to highlight. Okay, we're in chapter 10. We have, of course, the ark of wood. He's told to make a couple more tablets. Go up. Going to do this all again. And by the way, also make an ark, because you're going to put these in the ark. Don't go smashing them again. Okay. But we have absolutely no mention of this fancy ark with the cherubim and so on and so forth.
Who's supposed to make the ark?
Moses.
No, you said Moses or Bezalel and the Holy Ark?
No,
Who's
Moses.
Supposed to make the ark? The ark, I mean, Jono, the ark.
No, Moses.
Really?
It's a timber wooden box that he made, and we have the same in the Moses scroll. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting that Deuteronomy and the Moses scroll say that Moses made the ark when, according to the priestly writer, Exodus 25, Exodus 31, Exodus 37, it describes an ark made by two spirit-filled artisans, Bezalel and Aholiab, and that's the one that everybody knows because it's got the creatures that are made like the form of something which is in the heaven or the earth or something under the earth, and placed on top of a box that has two stone tablets that say, don't make any carved thing or image of anything in the heaven above or the earth beneath or the water under the, and they're on top of the box. Anyway.
That's it. And so verse 1 and 2, I think, is it's sort of added. This is not found in the Moses scroll, but the Moses scroll does pick up in verse 3 where it says, I made an ark of acacia wood, I made an ark of wood.
That's first person. That's first person.
Carved two tablets of stone like the first. Now here's a question. This is something for the viewers to think about. I don't know the answer to this. Did Moses also supply the stone tablets of the first set of commandments that Elohim inscribed upon.
Hey, let me...
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I want to bring Ezra in and tell him to quickly summarize the differences that we see in Exodus 34, which tells the same story as Deuteronomy 10.
Let's do that.
I think that would be fun. Ezra, help us out here.
Yes, the two versions of the second tablets problem. This is one of those moments where the documentary hypothesis lets us see seams the traditional reading tends to smooth over. In Exodus 34, we're deep in what Friedman would call the J, or possibly a JE blend narrative. There, Waiwa tells Moses to carve out the tablets himself, and the content written on them, at least in the immediate context, appears to be the covenant stipulations just delivered, which are the so-called ritual decalogue, things like pilgrimage festivals and sacrificial regulations. The ark isn't in view at all. The focus is on restoring the covenant after the golden calf episode. Deuteronomy 10, however, is classic DTR material. Moses says that he made an ark of acacia wood before going up the mountain. Wahwa wrote on the new tablets the words which he had written before, explicitly the 10 words from Horeb, and Moses placed them directly in the ark. The focus here isn't on restoring sacrificial law, but on reinforcing the moral ethical covenant, and the ark becomes a central prop in the memory. From a compositional standpoint, these are not simply two tellings of the same event. They represent two theological traditions about covenant renewal. The Exodus account is cultic and likely rooted in an older Southern tradition, where covenant renewal centers on ritual law. The Deuteronomy account reflects the Josianic era theology, written law in the ark, moral exhortation, and the ark as a sacred national symbol. The fact that in one tradition Moses carves the tablets, and in the other Yahweh writes them, and that the ark is either absent or built in advance, shows how these stories were shaped by different communities with different emphases, one temple priestly, one didactic, and reformist. If we map it onto the larger DTR framework, Deuteronomy's version is less about the history of the event and more about fitting it into the grand theological arc, obedience to the written covenant as the heart of Israel's national story.
Well, I tell you what. No, I like that. I think I agree with most of that. But here's something that puzzles me, Ross. As I was just mentioning, Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 3 to 5, is largely taken from the Moses scroll, right?
Sure.
Then we launch into what appears to my eyes to be a very different writer. At least it has material clearly borrowed from another source, or it seems that way to me. It says from Birot B'nai Ya'akan.
Wait, before you do that, do this if you don't mind. Read verse 5, then skip down and pick up in 10 and show that.
Right.
And then
exactly.
Or either way, however you want to do it.
No, so verse 5. Then I left and I went down the mountain and I deposited the tablets in the ark that I had made, where they still are. And the Lord had commanded me, verse 10. And I stayed on the mountain as I did the first time, 40 days and 40 nights. And the Lord heeded me once again. And the Lord agreed not to destroy you. And the Lord said to me, and so it flows.
No gap.
But then what we have here in verse 6 is from Birot B'nai Ya'akan, the Israelites marched to Mosra. Aaron, here's the second mention of Aaron, died there. Mosra, again, as you pointed out, a different location where he died.
It's supposed to be Mount Hor, but
Mount Hor. And Hahor there, and he was buried there, and his son Eleazar, now we have Eleazar, I think this is the only mention of him, I don't know, became priest in his stead, and from there they marched to Good God, and from Good God to Jobbath, and the region of running brooks. And at that time, I set apart the tribe of Levi. Now we're dealing with Levi as a tribe. They're going to be the priests. They're going to carry the ark of the Lord's covenant, to stand in attendance and to bless his name and to do this and that. This is why the Levites, Ross, have received no hereditary portion among with their kinsmen. This is the reason why, because it's going to be curious. Why do all of the so-called tribes have all of this land, but the Levites don't? We need a solution to that problem, and the solution is because they are the chosen ones to carry the ark and officiate and so on and so forth. The Lord is their portion, as the Lord your God spoke concerning them. So there's that little Band-Aid.
What the other thing about this is not only does it give it's clearly a parenthetical insertion, a later interpolation.
It seems like that.
And not only does it not tell the same place for Aaron's death, but the other thing that really stands out about this, if you look at it, the stops, like where it talks about from good God they went here and Jot Bata and so forth, overlay that and put it side by side with Numbers chapter 33, and you'll see that doesn't even line up. So this is clearly a different tradition. It is not aligned with what we read elsewhere, and it certainly doesn't fit with the running story of Deuteronomy. It's out of place.
It seems very foreign to me. It seems out of place and foreign. And yet, Ross, my point is that Friedman and Baden don't acknowledge that little pericope as a different author. They're running with DTR1 on both of those, which is really interesting to me. What is different is Baden attributes 10, 14 to 19 to the redactor, but actually we have some crumbs of the Moses scroll in there, which is also very interesting. What we have there from 14, mark the heavens to their uttermost reaches. It belongs to the Lord your God, the earth and all that is in it. We don't have that in the Moses scroll, but Moses scroll picks up in verse 15. Yet it was to your fathers that the Lord was drawn in his love for them, so that he chose you, their lineal descendants, from among the peoples. And then it says, as is now the case. The interesting thing about that is that is derived from the Moses scroll. It is an affirmation of patrilineal inheritance, if you like. It is the tribal status and the land that goes to those tribes is inherited and passed on patrilineally from father to son and father to son. He chose their lineal seed. It's a physical, Israel, once again, it's a physical people patrilineally inherited, and that's right here. And then it goes on. Let's see. Oh, and then we get this idea of in verse 16, cut away therefore the thickness around your hearts and stiffen your necks no more. The idea of circumcising one's heart, and that's again highlighted in the writings of Jeremiah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, not only is that highlighted in Jeremiah, but let me put something by you. You know, a lot of people will make fun of the Mormon religion because you have some tablets and supposedly the angel
It's
Moroni.
a rich target, though, Ross, come on.
Yeah, I know it is, but ahead. Guess what?
Yeah.
Where are our tablets, Jono? So, because we want to say, well, you know, God wrote these tablets and then Moses broke them, and you're like, oh, but he made some more. You're like, okay, can I see them? Well, no, you can't. Those are lost too. Wait a minute. What? Well, there's one guy that has an answer for where they're at now, and that's Jeremiah. So think about it. Jeremiah supervises the end of everything. He supervises the downfall of the kingdom, the taking away into Babylon and so forth. And one of the things that he says is in Jeremiah chapter 3, in fact, let me just go there because this is really important, particularly when we talk about what we're looking at now. Let me just go to Jeremiah chapter 3, and I think most of you know where we're going with this, but I just think it's kind of interesting. And by the way, this is the one text in Jeremiah, Jono, that it says takes place during the reign of Josiah. Okay? Only Jeremiah 3, nowhere else. I did 25 weeks on this. So here we go. Look at verse 16, Jeremiah 3. And when you have multiplied and increased in the land in those days, says the Lord, they shall no longer say, the ark of the covenant of the Lord shall not come to mind or be remembered or missed, nor shall another one be made. The reason I think this is interesting is because the last time the ark is seen is in the days of Josiah. 2 Chronicles 34 and 35. Chapter 35 says there's big Passover, hadn't been one like it since the days of Samuel, whole other discussion. But guess what? Josiah tells the Levites who carry the ark, now you can put it back in the temple. You no longer have to carry it on your shoulders. Yeah. What? You mean it wasn't in the temple? Well, interestingly enough,
apparently not.
When Hilkiah finds the scroll, he doesn't mention the ark. So Jeremiah has a tough job. He's got to explain, where did the ark go? We don't have the tablets, so he's got this other idea. Look, there's coming a time when God's going to write his law on your heart. On your heart. Oh, so we don't need the 10. It just all feels like they're trying to answer the greatest questions of all time. Where is the ark? Don't know. Where are the tablets? Don't know. You mean to tell me the most important part of your whole religion, and you don't know where it's at? Interesting. But it is interesting that the guy who oversees, remember what Jeremiah's mission in, he's going to tear down, he's going to do this, he's going to rebuild. What he rebuilds, among other things, is a faith that is about the Torah written on the heart. And guess who else talks about that? Deuteronomy. So the question is, does that somehow link Jeremiah/Baruch with Deuteronomy? I think you can figure it either way, but I think it might.
It would be grand, would it not, in a archaeological expedition to uncover tablets that are written as Guta points out, the way that it's written in the Moses scroll in the first person with the interpuncts and so on and so forth. And he says, are we actually looking at the way that it appears on the two stone tablets? Is that's the way that it's represented on this on these pieces of leather? Yes, that would be grand, and it would be authenticating, wouldn't it? And yet, even if we did find those stone tablets, Ross, there's no way that we would be able to analyze them and say, oh, well, this is definitely from God. God clearly inscribed these. I mean, you would still not. You'd still have a hard time convincing the atheist.
No doubt.
And so, if we have the actual contents of those stone tablets in the Moses scroll, do we need the stone tablets? That's a question.
Or to Jeremiah's question, an even more important question: are we yet at the place where we've got these words, divine words, inscribed upon the tables of our heart? I think that is a beautiful metaphor, if nothing else. And Jeremiah truly does prepare the world. If you take Jeremiah out of the equation, Jono, you don't have Judaism. You don't have Christianity, not in the sense that we have it now. I think that he and Baruch set up the world for religion without a temple, religion without an Ark of the Covenant, and religion without stone tablets.
So what do you think, and we can't spend too much time here, but what do you think it means to have them written on your heart as opposed to written in stone? Do you think it means to know them by heart and therefore be more conscious of the observance of them? Is that what it means?
I would say that's the way I've always thought that's the way I've always kind of interpreted that. It could mean something else. Maybe you have insights. I think Deuteronomy and Jeremiah bring this to us, and it remains one thing that it deserves more attention, and that is, what is it that's to be written on the heart? Deuteronomy 6, we also see it in the Moses scroll, that there are certain things that are to be written on the heart, and those include to love God, to love Elohim, and so forth. So what's really the core of this message, and what should be on our heart? I think that is the key. That's the question. But I think it does mean to internalize. I've called it Torah on the inside. It's an inside job. How do you love your neighbor? How do you love God? What are the things that you would do and not do?
And so this goes to the question of the Shema, because really the Shema is talk about it with your children when you rise, when you walk along the way, when you lie down, like when you're doing all the things. Have them foremost in your mind, or and with everything that you do with your hands, written on your hands and so on and so forth. the Shema seems to be saying in perhaps a more elaborate way to have them on your heart. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah. No, I agree. No, I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Speaking of the Shema, we're going to get to that in just a minute. But before we do, the chapter 10 finishes in verse 22 with the Moses scroll. Your fathers went down to Egypt with 70 souls. What it doesn't attempt to do here, Ross, is justify or explain who those 70 souls were. We've talked about this before, but in Genesis chapter 46, verses 26 to 27, it claims that all the lineal descendants who went down to Egypt with Jacob were numbered 66, adding that Joseph and his 2 sons were already in Egypt, and concluding that all, quote, all the persons of the household of Jacob who came to Egypt were 70. And yet the previous verses 8 to 25, number the sons and the daughters of Jacob's 4 wives, 33, 16, 14, 7, totaling 70, 2 of which died in Canaan. So adding the Jacob and his 3 wives, Rachel having died, brings the total to 72 who went to Egypt, including Joseph and his 2 sons who were already in Egypt, according to the Genesis narrative. So concurring with Genesis, Exodus chapter 1, verse 5 claims that all the descendants of Jacob numbered 70. But Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 22 is derived from the Moses scroll, and it simply says that all of your fathers went down to Egypt with 70 souls. It doesn't answer the question
to identify who.
How many were Jacob's lineal descendants? It doesn't have to do that. It just mentions the way it's mentioned in the Moses scroll. Chapter 11, Ross. All right. Speaking of the Shema, verses 13 to 21, unless you want to highlight anything before that.
No, I mean, I do think just from a general, broad perspective, we do have overlap in chapter 6 and chapter 11. And just like you talked about early when we kicked off the program, there does seem to be these different sources or maybe different versions that tell some of the same material, and otherwise it's just a repetition. But what do you make of that? I mean, what is it? Why is it?
Yeah, exactly. What do you make of it? It really is. It's beyond me, but it's difficult not to think about when you're reading these chapters, because from verse 13 you have another preview, I suppose, of the consequences of the blessings. It says, "If then you obey the voice of obey the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, loving the Lord your God and serving Him with all your heart and with all your soul, I will grant the rain on your land in season, early rain, late rain." You're going to have grain, wine, oil. You're going to have cattle, so on and so forth. So it seems to be another preview of that in a paraphrased way. But then from verse 18, therefore impress these words upon your very heart. Here exactly what we were talking about. Bind them as a sign on your hand. Let them serve as symbols on your forehead, and teach them to your children, reciting when you stay home, when you're away, when you lie down, when you get up, and inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, to the end that you and your children may endure in the land that Lord your God swore to give your fathers to assign to them, so on and so forth. That is clearly a paraphrase to the Shema, Ross.
Yeah. No, I think it's really interesting. I have in my notes compared Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9, verses 11, 13 through 21. You have bind, right. 11 does add rain, agriculture, reward, punishment, matrix.
Little elaboration,
So there's a little bit of difference. But again, remember when we started the Torah portion, there was a piece of this, the consequences of the covenant on the blessing side we kind of kick off with. And here, as we get into 11, again, we're sort of talking about this reward, punishment, matrix, because it's leading us into, I don't want to jump ahead, but it's leading us into this announcement that there's going to be this great ritual done when you cross into the land, which we're going to be leading up to.
That's right. Not without a massive commercial break in between. But
that's right.
Our Torah portion ends with, so from verse 22 on, if you then faithfully keep all the instruction that I command you, again, repetition, loving the Lord your God, walking in his ways, holding fast to him, the Lord will dislodge before you all the nations You will dispossess nations greater and more numerous than you. Every spot on which your foot treads shall be yours. And then we have an expansion of the borders here, Ross. It says your territory will extend from the wilderness of the Lebanon and from the river, the Euphrates, to the western sea. No man shall stand up before you. The Lord your God will put the fear, the dread of you over the whole land in which you set your foot, as he promised you. And that is the way that our Torah portion ends. Final thoughts before we wrap it up.
Man, I tell you what, that was a lot. I know we jumped around, we covered a lot of ground, but we had to. I mean, this is Deuteronomy, folks. It is filled with good stuff. And I mean, there are things that were in my notes, Jono, I didn't even get to. I felt a little bit like, hey, I don't know if I can cover all that. But hey, it was good stuff. I think Ezra did a good job tonight. I thought it was good. What do you think?
Well, we're going to be back here this time next week where we get into Re'eh, and that is, as you pointed out, the beginning of the blessing and curse ceremony, which is very exciting, but then we are rudely interrupted. We're going to be talking about that interruption
interrupting
next
Moses.
Week. Interrupting Moses, as you so often put it. But until then, dear viewers, like, comment, share. Have a great week. And
hey, Shabbat Shalom. And if
Shabbat
you're
Shalom.
if you're watching, meet me in the Zoom call, and we're going to have some great discussion on these points. And if you're not watching it live, you can get that later and watch it.
There you can. Ezra, take us on out.
All right, friends, that's where we'll wrap up for today. We've wandered with Moses through covenant warnings, peeked behind the editorial curtain of the Deuteronomistic historians, and even compared two very different sets of identical stone tablets. So your brains have had their daily manna. If you want to keep peeling back those textual layers with us, Ross will be diving even deeper in the after-class session. You'll find the link right there in the description. Come join, bring your notes, and maybe even a strong cup of coffee. We'll see you there.